Good afternoon if you're on the East Coast where I am, or good morning if you're on the West Coast. My name is Becky Robinson, and I'm so thrilled today to have Melissa Lamson with me. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Becky. Hi, everyone.
We're going to get started with our webinar in just a few minutes, 3 simple strategies for spectacular leadership. And I'm personally really excited because this is the time of year that a lot of people will reflect and plan for how they want to be better and what they want to achieve in the year ahead. And so this comes at an absolutely perfect time. Before we begin, I want to let you know about a few technical details related to today's event. The first is that we are recording, and we'll provide this recording to you later, along with a PDF of today's slides. So no need to scramble to take notes. We'll provide this for you to review so you can reflect as you prepare for 2017. The other thing I'd love to invite you to do today is to live tweet this event. If there are ideas that resonate with you, we would love to see you share those using the hashtag spectacular leadership, which is at the bottom of every slide. And both my Twitter handle and Melissa's are also in the chat window for you to take a look at. While you're looking at the chat window, I would love to have you go ahead and try it out and say hello. Unlike our other events, if you've attended them in the past, we're going to invite you today to both use the question panel and the chat window. So there's some conversation we'd like you to have with each other in the chat, and then later in the broadcast we will accept your questions on the topics that Melissa is sharing with us today. So if you can take a moment and give me a shout out either in the question panel or in the chat window, and we can find out where you're calling in from today, and we'll make sure that you know how to use your GoToWebinar panel. We would love to see that this afternoon. So I might have mentioned that I'm on the East Coast. I'm in Michigan. Melissa today is calling in from her home office in Phoenix, Arizona. And we were chatting about the weather, and I'm beyond jealous, Melissa, that you have 60 degrees today. We're looking at some snow tomorrow, so please be sure to tell us where you're from. It looks like we have some callers today from Tennessee. We have Tallahassee. I know who that is. Mississippi. We have a caller saying hello from Chicago, from Lansing, Michigan, from Virginia, North Carolina, Texas, North Dakota. I guess I should stop complaining about the weather. New York, and Delaware. So seems like we have a great mix of folks attending today, and we look forward to our engagement with you throughout this event. As I mentioned before, we will have questions that you can share with us toward the end of today's event. So I want to take a quick moment to introduce Melissa before we dig into the content of the session. As I mentioned before, Melissa is calling in today from Phoenix, Arizona, and Melissa has over 20 years experience in growing leaders and bridging cultures and empowering teams. I'm always so happy when I get to talk to Melissa about her world adventures. She's often speaking, consulting, and coaching leaders from around the world. And she's worked with companies like IKEA and LinkedIn and MTV and Porsche. So she's really been privileged to work with executives at the top levels of some powerful companies around the world. And in that work, Melissa has learned some key strategies that she's going to share with us today. So Melissa, thank you so much for investing your time, and I look forward to learning with you throughout this hour.
Thank you so much, Becky. What a nice introduction. Hi, everyone. I hope that you're able to participate by chat and enjoy the poll today. This is a really great subject, as Becky said, for the beginning of the year, thinking about how are we as leaders and how can we improve and what makes us spectacular, even just great. 3 simple strategies for spectacular leadership. I'm going to go through those 3 with you. And I really, after all of this time that I've spent with leaders and in teaching these leadership workshops, it's really a synthesis of what I find to be most beneficial and most useful for leaders today. So we'll go ahead and jump into the content. And, our workplace it's so amazing. When I think about the workplace even 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago to a certain extent, we have flatter hierarchies, at least in the US and in Europe. We're working more in teams, we're working more collaboratively, and that collaboration is taking place virtually, right? So all over the country as well as all over the world. So we have all of these kinds of challenges around technology and time zones and language and cultural barriers potentially for our communication, and that makes our teamwork and therefore leading that teamwork sometimes daunting and overwhelming, but also can be really fun. So I don't mean to emphasize the negative, but certainly it proposes a whole new set of challenges that we as leaders really need to work on and foster and become really savvy at. Also, there are new concepts in leadership, right? Today we've heard about conscious leadership, we've heard about compassionate leadership, we've heard about service leadership, and these are all really amazing ways of leading, and I highly suggest that you go and dig into some of the articles and books on those topics. I'm not necessarily going to refer to those today. However, I do understand that we have all of these kind of ideas and concepts around leadership that are being kind of thrown at us all the time, and that can also be a little bit confusing. Well, which style is the style I should use, and what's going to work best with my team? And so the good news is that what I'm going to share with you with these 3 strategies for spectacular leadership is that all 3 of these strategies you can use through any form of leadership that you decide to choose. So you might just say, I don't really have a type of leadership, I'm just going to use these strategies that Melissa recommends. Or you might decide, oh, I'm really going to become a conscious leader or a compassionate leader, and still these strategies will work well for you. So I'll go ahead and get into what we're going to be talking about. The first spectacular strategy, if you will, for leadership is assess styles. So what do I mean by assess styles? Well, it's simple in a way in that we all have different styles. We know that, right? Some of us like to work to music. Some of us like to work to silence. Some of us prefer to work with a lot of people. Others prefer to work with less people, right? We like to travel. We don't like to travel. So there's all kinds of styles, right? And I want to focus on some of those that are sort of most important today, particularly for your learning and development and leadership programs. Personality is one big one, right? So personality styles, whether you're extroverted or introverted, whether you're thinking or feeling, right? These are all sort of measurements of what are our individual personalities like. Let's come back to the extroverted, introverted. So someone who's extroverted or has a preference for extroversion prefers to solve problems and make decisions in a group of people. So they hash it out, talk it out. They like to be more verbal. They like to be more interactive. And that's how they're going to solve a problem. So someone who's extroverted is going to be more motivated, and you're going to be more productive when they're able to talk through with other people. Someone who has a preference for introversion, right, or who's more introverted, is going to be more interested in solving a problem or making decisions or working on something on their own. So they'll spend time kind of quietly working on something by themselves, and then they'll come back to the greater team and share the results of what they've been working on. They're going to feel more motivated and more productive if they get that kind of environment. So it's really important that as leaders we understand what people's styles are, what their preferences are, so that we can cater to those, we can adapt to those, we can ensure that we create the right environment for them. So there are all kinds of assessments, as you may know, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, there's something called insights, which are the different colors, right? There's DISC. There's all kinds of personality assessments that I would highly recommend that you check out. But key is that you get into dialogue and talk to folks about what are your preferences? What kind of work style do you prefer? And even having a simple conversation, you can gather a lot of information. So culture is also there, and of course I'm a little bit biased because culture and gender are 2 of the expertise that I work with. And culture is important in that we're looking at what are those dimensions around culture that influence the way people behave or communicate, right? So I'll share one with you. I promised I'd talk a little bit about consensus decision-making versus direct decision-making. And that's really highly influenced by the topic of hierarchy. So there are those cultures in the world that are more hierarchical. So those who are more hierarchical would expect that their leader would then take the role as making the decisions. They would decide on the direction that the team is supposed to go in a particular project, and they would also set the actual tasks out for the people to follow. Additionally, and this is probably even more important for you, is that someone who believes that the hierarchy is in control of the direct decision making also believes that the leader will come to me and ask me if I have problems, or ask me if they need to solve something for me, or to remove obstacles so that I can be successful in my task. I am not, if I believe that, if I'm high hierarchy, as we say in the cultural world, I am not going to necessarily go to my leader and say, wow, I have problems, can you help me? I would see that as a sign of disrespect. So the cultures like Mexico, India, China, those are all what we call high hierarchy cultures, and that's important to know that they would expect the leader to take a more active and proactive stance with us. Alternatively, when we look at low hierarchy cultures, we're talking about the US, Canada, Australia, parts of Europe, they tend to be more collaborative in terms of decision making. So a leader sees that they have experts in the team and they see themselves as the person who coordinates the experts. So any individual within the team could actually drive the decision. Consensus can be made within the experts, and the leader just facilitates making sure that we meet the deliverable. Now in that case, and this is maybe more typical for most of you, I'm assuming, is that as a leader, I'll say, look, my door's open. Anytime you have problems or you need something from me, just go ahead and ask me and I'll get involved. Otherwise, we presume that our team wants to be left to work autonomously, right? So in a low hierarchy culture, the leader stays out unless our team member asks us to come in. So you can kind of see the rub, right? So if we have a high hierarchy with a low hierarchy culture, they're going to have a little bit of a conflict if the high hierarchy culture is expecting the low hierarchy leader to come in and ask them to solve problems, and they don't, okay? So be aware that there's also cultural styles that we need to think about, particularly if you're working globally, but certainly it also applies to working at home. Gender is also interesting. There was a great story that just happened recently. There was two executives, a male executive and a female executive, both their peers, and they were standing together outside the office of the female executive. The female executive said to her female assistant, oh, hey, when you get a chance, I'd really appreciate it if you could contact client X because they would be really interested in getting more information about this particular documentation. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Just let me know how it goes when I get back. So the male executive and the female executive walk off. You know, her assistant says, of course, I'll help you. And they walk off, and the male executive turns to the female executive and says, wow, you shouldn't talk to your assistant like that. That's not going to gain you any credibility. She won't respect you. And the female exec said, what are you talking about? He said, you should just be more clear. Just say to her, hey, email client X and get the documentation and give them the information. Okay, really appreciate it. Thanks. And the female exec, wow, I couldn't do that. She would think I was being too pushy or, you know, not very friendly, and it wouldn't motivate her at all. And he goes, no, I think the opposite. So it was very interesting to hear these completely different perspectives from two people working for the same company, essentially the same department, male and female, how they had totally different approaches about how they would delegate work or ask for particular tasks to be done. And so I think we can't underestimate that men and women also have very distinct differences in the way that they communicate and the way that they lead in an organization. So I can't get into the reasons why today about those differences, but certainly if you want more information, I have a document on my website that you can download on female and male differences in communication. You can download that for free if you like, and certainly contact me if you're interested in any workshops on gender communication, because that's something I also do. Good, so we've talked about styles. So I said 3 simple strategies for spectacular leadership, right? Well, it may not be entirely simple to understand someone's style, but it is easy to discover that with the tools that are available to do that. So check out some of those assessment tools, find out what your team needs, and start to understand how you can match their style. We have a poll here, and I hope that people are able to participate in it, because I think it could be interesting for those of you on the call to see what are people really grappling with out there. We have a bunch of people on the call, at least 74 people on the call right now, and I think it'd be interesting for you to hear which style do you believe is a source of miscommunication in your team. So is it culture that's influencing the way your team might be having some conflicts or some difficulties? Is it personality? Is it gender? Or is it something else? And I'd love to hear an example if you have the chance to write in chat. So I'm going to put up the poll now, and we'll see whether it's culture, personality, or gender, which is really the style that is causing the most rub in your team.
Melissa, would you like me to give you a hand? Oh, here we go.
Yeah, I got it.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Melissa. I am curious to see what people say. Do we want to let people know the clues of what we're hearing so far, or are we going to wait for the big reveal at the end?
Oh, this is great. Yeah, I just want to give people a chance to check in. So it looks like personality is number one. It's coming in at 77% so far. Culture is second, which is good. It means we do have some folks who are working globally or certainly across cultures. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and close it out.
Sure, while you're doing that, Melissa, we do have a few others that have been written in the question panel. So a couple of people have mentioned values as an additional area of miscommunication. Someone mentioned generational gaps, so Gen X versus millennials causing miscommunication, the issue of power and control, and someone mentioned a dictatorship culture with personality. So I'm not exactly where that falls, maybe a combination of culture and personality.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's interesting because someone with a more high hierarchy perspective in terms of leadership is going to come across to a low hierarchy team as being a dictator, so, or a micromanager. So that's not totally an uncommon situation. I'm not sure if it's just the individual personality or if it is cultural, but certainly we could dig into that if that's something you'd want to do.
Here's another other for us, Melissa, email versus face-to-face as a cause of miscommunication on a team.
Wow, okay. Yeah. Good. All right, let me close the poll and we can see what is up there.
I shared those results for you, Melissa. It looks like the final results are in. Not a single person sees gender as a source of miscommunication. 75% personality, 18% culture, and 7% of folks thought there was something else, and we shared those examples.
Okay, good. Good. Thanks very much for sharing those examples in chat. I can't actually see them. Are they in chat or are they in questions?
They're in questions. I don't think anyone has discovered the chat. So far everyone's using the question panel.
I see. Okay. All right. So I actually can't see the question panel, so I'm not able to answer those yet, but I'm sure you can read those to me and we'll make sure that we can get them done. All right. So personality, good. Well, then many of you will find that leadership style will be a pressing issue for you, certainly, in terms of being able to manage your team successfully. So appreciate you participating in that. We'll move on now to the next part of assessing styles. So one other piece I wanted to mention in terms of styles has to do with capability and engagement. And this comes from situational leadership, which many of you may have heard of. And the axes are what is someone's skill level versus what is someone's motivation level in terms of doing the actual task. And so this is just another way of looking at it. This doesn't necessarily talk about a person's personality or a person's disposition, but it talks about, as related to a specific task, what a person is able to do and certainly motivated to do. Does that make sense? So it's one particular task. So if you look at, there's 4 different areas here. You could have high capability and high engagement, right? So someone who's highly skilled and highly motivated. Someone who's low skilled, right? So who doesn't know how to do it and also isn't very excited about doing it. And then you have other combinations, right? So you have high capability and low engagement, or you have high engagement and low capability. So you have different ways of being able to see whether someone is interested and then able to do a task. So what's important about understanding this is if you get really good at assessing someone's capability and engagement, then you're able to not misdiagnose and then therefore misjudge the situation. So if someone is highly capable, but they're not very motivated, and we misjudge them as not being capable, so this comes back also maybe to that dictator comment too, is if that leader, if that particular leader is coming in and trying to teach people how to do things and show people how to do things, when the team is already highly capable, then what they're doing is they're demotivating the team by teaching them stuff that they already know, right? Or they already feel competent in figuring out themselves. And so engagement is lowering. So you have low engagement and low capability, and high capability. And so what's happening is that this engagement is not getting met, right? So if you have a good leader who understands what's happening, they'll come in and say, oh, wait, I need to motivate these people by giving them some autonomy, by helping them remove obstacles, by giving them new challenges, by letting them know that I understand that they're capable, right? And that might help raise the engagement a little bit. I've also had the situation, I don't know if you've had this, where new hires, right? Where I've hired someone in my own team, and they were so enthusiastic and confident and excited about being part of the team that I sort of forgot that they might not know how to do certain things, right? Because they're new to the team. Of course they're not going to know. And so I misjudge that, their enthusiasm, and so therefore I sort of forget, or I get a little lax on the training side. And so then I'll ask for a deliverable, and they'll deliver something, and I'll be like, oops, I didn't expect that. That's not exactly what I wanted. Oops, it's not correct, or whatever. And I'll have to come back in and have a conversation with them. And I have to do that very carefully so as not to demotivate them, right? Because their enthusiasm is so high. I want to keep that. But I certainly want to provide enough training so that they're excited about continuing to do the tasks. So that's also another area of style that I just wanted to point out to you. In situational leadership, Ken Blanchard is the person who is really well known for that. You can find that all over the internet in terms of articles and so forth. I also teach it in my own workshops. Good. Let's move on now to the second strategy to be spectacular, and that is giving feedback. And this is one of my most favorite topics. It's the topic that I hear from leaders, especially those that I'm coaching. They'll say to me, oh gosh, Melissa, I have to give some really difficult feedback to so-and-so, and I'm just so not looking forward to it. Or I really don't know what to say to these to the people in my team when it's performance review time. I have to give them some critical feedback, but I just hate to do it, and I'm not sure what I can say and what I can't say, et cetera, et cetera. So giving feedback, I mean, of course, if it's positive, that's a little bit easier, right? And that's very important to give positive feedback, but giving constructive or negative or critical feedback is when it really becomes important. So as a leader, if we become good at giving feedback, that's when we can be very successful with having that mutual respect and mutual trust with our team, because they understand why we're giving the feedback, how the feedback is helpful, etc. So I just want to ask you a question before I give you some tips around feedback and giving feedback. I want to ask you a question about what kind of feedback that you've received when it's been constructive or negative, and when it didn't go well, what happened? So what happened when you gave you were given constructive or negative feedback and it didn't go well? What happened? Why wasn't it helpful? What did the person do or not do? And just write a couple examples in chat.
Melissa, I had a couple of people say they couldn't find the chat, and so the way to find the chat, it's at the very bottom of your GoToWebinar panel, and I did put a test there. If you can't see the chat, then feel free to go ahead and write it in the question panel, and I'll read some of those out. So far I see that someone got feedback and it wasn't helpful because it wasn't specific enough. The person was disengaged. The person that had the feedback that wasn't specific enough said that that the person was disappointed. The person giving the feedback had a horrible approach. They felt disengaged. Blame and bad feelings involved. The person's feedback was disempowering rather than empowering. The person was angry, or maybe you felt angry. Going through the motions of giving feedback versus any real depth of feedback. The feedback was appropriate for the speaker's style and not mine. Let's see, demotivating, needed blended feedback. It felt more like a personal offense and blame than feedback on a neutral level. Lots of conversation happening.
Yeah, good.
The attitude and manner in which the feedback was given, business versus personal. And maybe, Ricardo, you could say a bit more about that. Was it more business instead of personal, or more personal instead of business?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we hear a lot, is that people that critical feedback becomes almost a personal attack in a way. And that it's really important that feedback isn't personal, but that it's about the actual facts at hand, and also why it's important for that person to change or improve.
I actually just had someone write that in, Melissa, that feedback felt almost like an attack rather than constructive criticism. We have one person sharing, Melissa, that a leader collected negative feedback over time and then didn't give specific feedback. And then when they fleshed out the specifics, the leader didn't confirm facts, only took the other party's side, and she felt disengaged, angry, distrustful, and blindsided. Those are really powerful.
Yeah, yeah, it's so important. And, you know, in my experience, you know, 8 times, let's say 8 times out of 10, um, just to give people a little bit of leeway, the intention of feedback is positive. It really is to help the person improve, to fix the situation, to get the needs met for the customer, or for the vendor, or whoever. But what ends up happening is, because it's just delivered badly, or people don't know how to exactly deliver it correctly, it ends up being really hurtful and harmful in the team and to the individual, and that's difficult. And once the trust is broken, it's very hard to build it back up. So I'm really sorry some of you have had those kinds of experiences, because it's not nice. It's really not at all. And I hope that with some of the tips here, you'll at least take away some goodies to be able to apply, maybe to give your manager or your teammates who are not so good at giving feedback, give them some of these tips to become better, or at least apply them for yourself when you're giving feedback yourself. So I wanted to just give a few tips around that. So in terms of giving feedback, before we move on to the third strategy, the key thing with giving effective feedback is the ability to be very factual, right? So when you're giving feedback, you want to make sure that it's based on observations and facts, and therefore not hearsay. So if someone tells you to tell someone else, right, or gives you information about someone else and expects you to give that feedback to the person, I would highly encourage you to say, look, if you're having this issue with this person and it's an observable fact, then you please go deal with it with that person. Because if you start to talk about hearsay, it can be very tricky in terms of giving feedback. So I'd say stick to observable facts, and then you don't get personal, right? And then most importantly, give your intention before you give feedback. So you may say something simple like, look, my intention in telling you this is really to help you improve. My intention to tell you this because I know you're trying to become a star in this company. I want to let you know what you could do even better. I'd like to let you know what people expect here. You know, something like that, so that you can continue to build your image, so you can be successful, so you can get that promotion that you wanted if it's someone you're managing, for example. So if you give your intention up front, then it really opens the person to be able to get that and receive that feedback and not be defensive in terms of getting feedback, right? Because that's the other issue, is sometimes when we give feedback, we think we've given it well, and then it's not received. And then therefore there's no change. And that's really important, is that we can give that feedback so that we keep the relationship, we keep the person motivated, and we're able to continue to work together well. And so by giving your intention first, that often helps the person receive the feedback better. And then stick to facts. And then I would say, most importantly, create a culture of feedback. So allow people to be aware that you're going to have a feedback culture in the team, if you will, which means, or a culture of feedback, which means you come to them and say, look, as your leader, I'm going to give feedback. I also want to get feedback. I'd expect you to give feedback and also get feedback. And we're going to do that to each other, because that's going to help us all grow. It's going to help us all be productive, et cetera, et cetera. So if you normalize giving feedback, it doesn't become this big, scary thing that we hold on to or drag around with us for months and go, oh no, I have to do that feedback performance review. It's going to be really daunting. Performance reviews, by the way, should never be a surprise. By the time you get to the performance review time, when you're sitting in that meeting, it should be like, yep, you told me about that. Yep, we talked about that. Yeah, I improved there. And no, I still need to work on that. Okay? So performance reviews should certainly not be a surprise. And if you have a culture of feedback, then you're really able to do that effectively. Okay. Anything else on feedback? Anything else, Becky, in the questions that I should address? Okay. Good. Then I'd like to talk about the third strategy to being spectacular. Another favorite for me is the ability to coach. And some of you may say, okay, I know what coaching is, Melissa. And others may say, well, my son or daughter play in Little League and I know their coach, right? Or I played sports myself, so I certainly know what a coach is. So coaching, as we talk about it today, leadership coaching, executive coaching, career coaching, has sort of been founded, if you will. The methodology of coaching has been sort of attributed to Sir John Whitmore. And he was an athlete. He was actually a race car driver, and he coached a lot of professional athletes. And at some point he said, you know what? I think I want to try something different. Instead of telling an athlete what to do and how to do it, and how to improve, and what their next play should be, I think I'm going to start to ask them questions and ask them, how did it feel to throw the ball? What do you think you might do differently? How do you want it to feel next time? What could make it better? And just see if they could kind of come up with their own answers and therefore solve their own issues and then improve on their own. So he applied this methodology and he found that it was so successful when he was working with these professional athletes that he decided to take it into the business world. And I'm going to share with you the model that he presented in a moment. But first I'll tell you another story. So he took people who had no experience at all, which is also important. So they weren't professional athletes at all. They had never played golf before. And he said, I'm going to use this group and I'm going to have them work with a golf pro. And the golf pro is going to do sort of traditional coaching, if you will. He's going to tell them how to hit the ball and how to, choke up on the club and make sure that their stance is right. And, the way they swing is correct and all of that. He's going to correct them along the way. What Sir John Whitmore did was he decided he would just work with them with his methodology, his new methodology. And he said, look, just hit the ball. And people just hit the ball in any crazy way that they wanted to hit it, who had no golf experience. And then he said, okay, well, how did that feel? And they said, well, it felt a little strange. Well, what would make it feel more comfortable? Well, I think if I bent over a little more. Okay, we'll try that. And how does that feel? Then that feels a little more comfortable. What about your stance? Well, my stance, yeah, I think I could, spread my feet apart a little bit, and maybe I could choke up on the club a little bit more, and okay, try it again, hit it again. So how did that feel? Well, that felt a lot better. Great. So what else do you think you need to do? So he just, through a series of asking questions and confirming their answers when they answered their own questions, got them to a place of hitting the golf ball. So what was fascinating is both groups improved the same. Essentially, people could stand and hit the ball, and hitting the ball, for those of you who play golf, is already a big accomplishment, right, as a first-time golfer. And that was interesting in and of itself, that they both improved the same. But then the exit interviews were what really kind of clinched the deal on this. They interviewed those who had worked with the golf pro, and they said, yeah, it was fun. It was cool to work with a golf pro. I might take up golf. It was interesting. So people consistently said the same thing who worked with the golf pro. Then those who worked with Sir John Whitmore said, additionally, wow, I never thought I could play golf. I might even take up golf. This is really great. I mean, I could figure this out on my own. This was really fun. I mean, swinging a golf club is not that hard. And the level of excitement and enthusiasm and motivation was totally different from those who worked with the golf pro because they felt so self-motivated, right? They did their own, they had solved their own issues and accomplished their own goals just by a series of asking questions. So what makes that good is that as a coach in our organization, the people who we're coaching don't necessarily have to be experts. We don't necessarily have to be an expert in what we're coaching on. We just have to be a good facilitator of questions in order to come up with suggestions and solutions for a particular problem or task or idea, right? So coaching can be very, very powerful. And as a leader, particularly as a leader in an organization where there's lower hierarchy, it can be very, very useful to have people really feel autonomous and like they're empowered to take their own decisions. So this is the GROW model. I'm just going to share it with you here, and you're welcome. Maybe take a screenshot of this, or you can certainly Google this at a later point. But the GROW model is very, very popular, and there's a whole bunch of questions. When I teach the course on this, I'll share with you a whole bunch of questions that you can ask as a coach, so that's very useful. There are 4 parts to this. The goal, which is essentially what is the person trying to achieve, right? And it may take a few questions to get them there because sometimes people might come to you and they're not entirely sure what their goal is, but they have a general idea. So the goal is important. Then starting from the goal, you get into, well, what's the reality of the situation today? What's the situation now? Who's involved? What's it look like? Where would you like to be? How could it improve? Who else is doing the same thing? Why is it important to you? What would it look like when you had achieved this goal? Right? So you just asked a bunch of questions, which helps the person really refine, first of all, what their goal is, but also understand where are they right now. It benchmarks them. Where are they in their achieving their goal? It also kind of, I mean, this is just between you and me, but it also helps them really be rooted in reality, right? Because sometimes you have someone come to you and go, I have this goal, I'm going to be a billionaire by age 30, right? And, you know, some people do achieve that, but other times, you know, it might take something else. So this reality, a series of questions in the reality category can really help someone just at least start to look at their goal in a more realistic way, right? So maybe not a billionaire, but how about we start with a millionaire and then see where we go from there. All right, and then options. So what could you do, right? And that's where you get into what are all the different possibilities. So you start to ask, so you ask that to someone. So what could you do to start to achieve that goal? What would be interesting? What could it look like? And what next? And what else could you do? And if someone gets stuck, you could certainly throw in an idea, but leave it open, right? So you might make a suggestion and then say, okay, and how does that idea look? What do you think about that? And then let them kind of continue on. And then the will is really the commitment. So what will you commit to doing, right? So that's where they commit to an action. It might be several actions. It might be a small action. It might be a big action. But when you get them to commit to that action, that gives you the opportunity to follow back up on this coaching conversation, right? So you get through the model, and then you can come back and say, great, so did you have a chance to follow up on that? And now what is it? Now how's your goal going, or what does it look like for you? So that's the GROW model. I had asked Becky if she would be willing to maybe just practice it a little bit with me, just so you could see how it worked. So I don't know if you had a chance, Becky, to come up with an idea of a goal, but do you have a goal that you'd be willing to share?
I do. We thought we would use the example of taking a vacation. I started my company about 4.5 years ago, and I haven't taken a truly unplugged vacation since I began. So the goal would be to take a real vacation.
Yes, that's super important. Wow, ooh, and I can feel you. I can understand that as an entrepreneur myself. Vacations are tricky. Good. So taking a vacation. So what's going on now? Why haven't you been able to take a vacation?
There's a whole bunch of factors. I think one is feeling like I can't let go, or, wondering what will happen in the business when I'm not here. Another is trying to figure out and coordinate schedules with my husband and his time off and kids and school and all those things. And so, there's always an excuse of why we're not going to take a vacation. This year we did have a vacation scheduled, and then we ended up buying and selling a house, and we had to cancel. And then I think the other barrier would be the phone, and how, even when we're on vacation, it's hard to completely unplug. And if I'm, looking at my email or social media, that's not a real vacation.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, unplugging is tricky. Yeah, so I mean, the good news is your business is obviously running really successfully. I'm a very happy client, so I understand that that's difficult, right? When you have such a commitment to so many clients and things are running well, that it's hard to step out of that, or to feel for somehow that you might be disappointing someone or not there for someone even for a few days. So I could certainly see that would be daunting. And then, of course, coordination and just scheduling, that's all, extra work that needs to be done. So I understand that those can all be tricky. Are there things that you thought that you could do in terms of starting to get ready to take that vacation? Because I know
Sure,
you did want to do that.
definitely. So one of the things I thought about was figuring out when my kids' spring break is, and proposing that as a week that our family could take together. So so that's one possibility. Another would be to pick a week in the summer that's kind of a down week. Our team schedules launches for books, and the summer is typically a slower time. So I could select a week even now for July or August, and mark it off on my calendar as a non-negotiable to take time off.
Okay, great. Anything else that you as an option, like would need to be done so that you could make your goal happen?
Well, perhaps talking with the team about the best ways that they can help fill in for the roles that I play in the company when I'm not here. And I know that some of my team members are on this call, so don't, I definitely trust my team to be able to fill in, but maybe just being able to work through some of those issues myself as it relates to letting go.
Sure.
Also, I think when the vacation comes, what I could do is take my email off my phone so that I'm not tempted to look at it and leave my computer at home.
Good idea. Good idea. Yeah, that's great.
I've done that before. I've taken Facebook off my phone, or Twitter off my phone when I've been on a trip, but I've never taken email off my phone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It makes a difference just turning it off. Just because you don't have that habit of clicking onto it and having all the emails roll in, and then you go, "Oh my gosh, all those emails." um,
Exactly.
is there something that's realistic that you could commit to doing within the next, say, few days? Out of those
I,
options, you said talking with the team, picking the spring break dates, picking a week in the summer. You know, maybe talking to clients, letting them know that you're interested in taking a vacation.
sure, I definitely can commit to blocking off a couple of weeks on the calendar as the ones that I'm going to take off, and I can start to communicate that to my team and my clients. And I think I can also commit to talking to my leadership team. Hey, what do you think it would look like if I were completely unplugged for a week, and what do I need to do to prepare you to fill in if I'm not here? So I can commit to those conversations.
Okay, good. So if I was going to be a little pushier as a leader or a manager, I could say, you know, Becky, what date, what time, and you know, will you send me an email to follow up to let me know that you took care of it? I'm not going to ask Becky to do that in this situation, but just for you to know, that's another way to kind of close these coaching conversations, is to be able to really have them commit to a specific date and time and even follow up with you that it's been done. So thanks a lot for participating, Becky. I appreciate it.
Sure, I'm happy to. I love the model.
Yeah, it's great. It's very simple. So you saw that through that, it was primarily just asking questions and reflecting back what Becky said. And you can use that. You can do it in 15 minutes. You can do it in a half hour. It might end up being a 2-hour coaching conversation. You can use it for career conversations. You can use it for skill conversations, maybe just sort of life conversations. It's a very effective model, so I highly recommend it. We teach it in leadership programs we do for LinkedIn, for SAP, et cetera. So it's a lot of managers are starting to use this model more and more, and so I think it's widely spreading, which I think is a much needed skill for managers and leaders. So I hope that you found it helpful.
Definitely.
Good. Yeah. Good. Okay, so we're essentially towards wrapping up. I wanted to let you know just what I had said to you earlier, because it's already been about a half hour. So we talked about, or 45 minutes, I guess, we talked about assessing styles. So the idea of personality, culture, gender, everything that makes up a person's style, communication, abilities, their behaviors, right? So getting to know those well, and then also understanding it in terms of capability and engagement, right? So as it pertains to a particular task. Then also we talked about feedback and how to give feedback and creating a culture of feedback, making sure that feedback is fact-based, and also always sharing your intention for the feedback so that people know that you're trying to help them, right? You're not trying to hurt them, you're trying to help them. And then coaching skills, which we just did, and using the GROW model to really effectively empower people to make their own decisions and come to their own conclusions. By the way, with coaching, it also frees you. It may feel like it takes a lot of time up front, and sometimes it does take a little bit more time than just giving the answer to someone, but it really eventually helps buy you time back, because people will understand that you're trusting them and empowering them to make their own decisions. And so if you start to do that, the coaching conversations, first of all, will become shorter, and also there may not be a need for as many, but you won't constantly be asked for the solution. You'll be asked for, hey, let's get into a coaching conversation so I can figure this out myself. All right. So I really appreciate you all being here today. This has been really fun for me too, because these 3 strategies are also absolutely in the wheelhouse of what I believe makes a leader spectacular. And if you'd like to ask questions, I'd be very happy to take them now.
Sure. So I'm checking out the question panel for your questions. We'd love to explore those with you. And I'd also love to encourage you to stay for the next few minutes because Melissa does have a very special offer to let you know about that everyone will be able to access after today's event. So I hope that you'll add your questions in the question panel now and then to stick around to hear everyone's questions and Melissa's answers. So Melissa, while we're waiting for folks to type questions in, one question that I had for you is I'm curious about your point of view. You mentioned at the start of the call different assessments that leaders can use to really get a sense of the people on their teams. Is there one that's your go-to assessment or your favorite or that makes the most sense to you?
Yes. I still like the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. I think the MBTI is really an excellent tool for assessing personality styles. So extroversion, introversion, thinking, feeling, sensing, intuition, and judgment, perception. So that really helps you understand how people need to, how much harmony they might need in a particular conversation in order to then take an action, how much logic they might need in a conversation, what level of detail do they need versus maybe no detail, right? We know those folks who are more detail-oriented, those who just don't want to deal with the details at all. And then certainly whether someone likes a lot of activity and a lot of interaction or someone prefers to have more quiet and is more reserved. All of those, I think, are really important aspects to working together in teams. So I find the MBTI to be very good. The other two that I like is the individual values assessment. So this helps map someone's individual values to their team's or their organization's values. And that's very interesting. That's by Barrett, the Barrett Values Assessment Center, if anyone's interested in looking them up. And I'm a certified facilitator for that. Also, there's the Global Mindset Inventory, and I'm a facilitator for that, is assessing someone's abilities to work successfully globally. And they're right here actually in Phoenix. It's Thunderbird School of Management that actually puts that assessment out. And I'm able to disseminate that. So that can be very interesting, particularly if you're working in a global team.
Great. That's very helpful, Melissa. Thank you. I did have a follow-up to my question from Patrick, who's wondering what happens when you get the results from a particular assessment and you find out that your personality is at odds with people on your team.
Yay! It means you have diversity. No. Well, I mean, the important thing is that we do. I mean, I'm joking and I'm not. It's tricky because then you know there's going to have to be a lot of give and take and conversation and adaptation, you know, on both sides. But I think it's once that the awareness is there, it becomes much easier because you go, okay, wait, you know, Patrick's not, you know, standoffish and unfriendly and unsociable. He's just more introverted, so he prefers to kind of see people one-on-one instead of being in happy hours every evening after work, or something like that. So I think it gives the awareness so that it builds the tolerance for those differences, and then you're able to kind of find workarounds. But the key thing is that you're able to match, or complement, I guess I should say, those differences with each other so that you can have a really good team to be able to meet your customer needs or meet your other partners' demands in terms of the business interaction. So it's actually better to have the diversity on the team so that you're more highly productive and you get more ways of doing things and more innovation comes out. But certainly it takes a moment to at least get that awareness out there and therefore build tolerance and then certainly build strategies. And that's basically the whole basis of my business is doing that, helping teams become really effective at doing that.
Fantastic, Melissa. So here's a question that is certainly in your sweet spot. It comes from Gareth, who works with an international NGO, and he's wondering how you address cultural differences when your team is mixed culturally. So you might have a preference to have participatory leadership approach, but your team includes international coworkers. So how can a leader effectively navigate that type of challenge of working with people with very different cultural approaches?
Yeah, that's right. So you know, even though you have a mixed cultural team, most of the time I've seen that leaders can sort of set the standard, if you will, for how it's going to work within a particular team. So, you know, just as software standardizes processes for us, we can also standardize communication practices or best practices in leadership or teamwork. And I think that's absolutely fine to say, you know, this is the way we're going to work together, and just show people and share with people what the expectation is. When you're working in a more participatory way, I think, or I'm guessing that also means flatter hierarchy, then you just want to talk to those who are more high hierarchy individually and say to them, hey, look, this is the expectation that I have of you in team meetings. So if you're not speaking up, I really expect you to say something in every team meeting. If you have problems or issues, I really want you to make sure that you come to me, email me, text me, chat me, just let me know if there's something that I can help with or solve. And then you could also agree as a leader to check in with them, right? You could set up standard status update meetings so that they're able to know that they'll have regular communication with you. And so I think in any case, you can set the standard and you can make explicit what works, how that standard is going to work, or that style, if you will. And then you can also give a little bit from your side as the leader to match their style a little bit more so that it's just more comfortable for them in terms of interaction individually with you. The mixed cultural team is also the most fun. The way that I like to talk about cultural skills is that we talk about it from the cultural dimensions first. So I don't go into a workshop and say all Germans are like this and all Chinese are like this and all Americans are like this, because I think that's not very helpful and too stereotypical or too bordering on stereotyping. But what I do is I say the cultural dimension around hierarchy is, or the cultural dimension around time is, or the cultural dimension around direct versus indirect communication is. And then I back into it. So I have people say, wow, but I'm really direct. And I notice that other people from France are really direct, and other people from Central Europe are really direct, and Americans are fairly direct. And then you start to they start to realize for themselves, okay, these are sort of those who are more direct and prefer that style. And then these are more indirect and those who prefer that style. And then you can have a more deeper conversation about then what do we do to blend or to adapt or to style switch. We use the term style switching between those styles. So there's all kinds of goodies like that.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Melissa. So I do have a question from someone who's wondering what you do when someone has a my way or the highway approach, or an approach where you're either with me or against me. And there are a couple of questions that have come in along these lines of, how do you deal with a difficult person? So are there some of these strategies that you would recommend using with people who are more difficult to work with?
Yes, yes. Well, within the whole course that I teach in dealing with difficult people and having difficult conversations, we emphasize a lot on the feedback and coaching. So I would say, first and foremost, they will need some feedback, right? And you'll want the model that we teach in the feedback, I shared part of it with you today, is really sharing your intention, sharing the observations, and then the key thing is the impact of what their behavior is. So the impact of their behavior on the team is what they need to hear. And you need to articulate that very clearly, that they're demotivating the team, that people are confused by the lack of autonomy or confused by the strength with which they're positioning themselves by saying it's my way or the highway, that it's causing downtime, that it's causing a lack of production, that clients are feeling uncomfortable because we're not able to communicate with them as effectively. Whatever it is that this person's behavior is impacting, it's really important that they get a very clear understanding of what that is. I'm not saying that there aren't just difficult people and you aren't able to necessarily break through in any way, but if you can manage to have a very factual conversation, sharing with them the impact, that should certainly help them go, oh wow, I didn't realize. My experience is that person is experiencing fear. They feel tremendous insecurity in their own leadership abilities. They feel tremendously fearful in what's going on around them. Maybe they're fearing for their job. Maybe they have some insecurity about the team. And that if we can get through that fear and that insecurity, then oftentimes we're able to have a more open conversation and dialogue in order to then solve the issues.
So Melissa, do you have any resources that you recommend on how to give really great feedback?
Yes, I have a bunch of articles. If you email me, I'd be happy to send you those articles. But I really highly recommend the model that we use, which is a 6-step model. So it's intention, observation, impact, discuss, focus, and agree. So if that's a model that's interesting to you, I'd be happy to share more if you email me. I'm certainly happy to send out a list of articles too.
Great. Thanks so much, Melissa. We might be able to include a link to one of those articles in our follow-up email. So this question is again related to cultural differences, and we have a question here really wondering how can you understand or assess what a culture of a team is when you're taking over a new team? So perhaps you're entering an organization, the team that you're going to lead has a culture, maybe it's low hierarchy, maybe it's high hierarchy. So is there a tool that you can use to assess a group's cultural beliefs that might not be tied to where they live or their ethnicity or background?
Oh, absolutely. I would say the individual, they also have a team values assessment within the Barrett Values Assessment Center. So there are several tools out there, and that's one of them, that they can look at either a team or an organization's culture, and it's really based on their values. So instead of looking at those cultural dimensions, if you will, you're looking at what are the values within the individuals and how do those values then make up the team culture and the team culture or team values, cultural values, but not ethnicity values, if you will. And then by looking at that, I would say you could use a specific tool like an assessment like that, or you could also, and I call it act like an anthropologist and spend a lot of time listening and asking questions in the beginning. That's where your coaching skills will actually come into play. A lot of times leaders, because they're so pressured to get results and to have quick wins and to feel as though they want to be really productive immediately, that they'll come into a new team and they'll just kind of start to, you know, bulldoze through to get everything done and to be effective and so forth. And the intention is good because you want to be successful and you want the team to be productive, and certainly you want to prove yourself as a new leader, but that's actually the opposite of what you should be doing. What you should be doing is taking time to be having conversations, to be doing a lot of listening. I call it act like an anthropologist. So you're studying, you're observing, you're listening, you're taking notes, you're asking more questions. So you're really kind of digging to figure out what makes this organization tick and what is going to motivate this team, and how were they working before, and what were the things that they liked about their leader in the past, and what were the things they weren't so happy with, and what do they wish that could change, and what would they like to see in the future, and how do they like to collaborate, how do they like to socialize, if they like to socialize, right? So I would just come up with a really significant group of questions that you could ask them to really get the information that you need, and take that time. We often say, sorry, but 90 days at least, to really become savvy and understanding what a team needs, particularly if you're a new leader coming into an established team.
That's a really important observation, and I love that idea of enter each situation the same way an anthropologist would. That's really a helpful picture for me, at least. I hope it is for everyone listening. So we only have just a few more minutes, and I want to make sure that we have a chance to share with our listeners and participants how they can stay in touch with you. So Melissa, would you mind to move to the slide that has more information about you for a quick second?
This one?
Thanks so much. The one before. Okay, thanks so much. So if you've enjoyed Melissa, she mentioned a few times during the call about the different work that she does in the world with organizations. And so I'll be sending a follow-up email with today's recording and with the PDF slides. But I hope that you'll visit Melissa's website at lamsonconsulting.com, where you'll see the various programs and workshops that she has available. Before the call started, Melissa was mentioning to me that this time of year she gets a lot of calls from organizations who are looking to book her for workshops in the new year. And so if you're looking to do that, if you're looking for perhaps a workshop on managing self, managing others, or managing teams, we'll provide Melissa's contact information, and I know she'd love to explore that with you. Her website also has a lot of great articles, as she mentioned. It has some great books. There's a lot of different email newsletters that you can sign up for where you receive tips in your inbox. So I encourage you to take a look at lamsonconsulting.com today and in the near future so that you can take advantage of all the great resources that Melissa has gathered there. So the next slide does include all of Melissa's contact info, and when you receive my email today, you will also receive a direct link where you can download one of Melissa's books for free, and there's not even an email address requirement there. So we hope that you'll take the time to discover Melissa's resources. And Melissa, if you can show that last slide with your social media links, I'm sure you would enjoy following Melissa's tweets and staying in touch with her on her other channels as well. So Melissa, thank you so much for investing this hour. I know I have a lot of food for thought as it relates to how I can lead my team effectively in the year ahead.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me. Happy
Have
holidays.
have a great day, everyone.